Welcome to Teaching Truth. Job descriptions are often very interesting to read, aren't they? For example, my job is to run away and call the police, a security guard. My job is to copy and paste things on the internet, a student. My job is to talk in other people's sleep, a university professor. My job is to shoot couples on their wedding day, a photographer. My job is to be so fly, a flight attendant. My job is to show up even though nobody called me, get well paid for an answer they knew already, and to a question they never asked. A management consultant. My job is to spend most of my day looking out the window, a pilot. And my job is to get out of the boat and walk on water, Peter. In our reflections this week, we are looking at the job description, if you like, the profile of a water walker, looking at those distinctive characteristics that go to make up someone like Peter who walks on water. And in our reflections today, we want to look at the fact that a water walker depends on Jesus. A water walker depends on Jesus. Peter was involved in fishing. Peter was used to going out in boats. Peter was used to the sea around about him. And yet, on this night, when Peter was in the boat with the 11 other disciples, it was a different kind of night. A different kind of night because a storm blew in. Not a minor squall, but a storm. Because as we read in the passage in Matthew chapter 14, which is the basis for our reflections over these weeks, we read that the boat was tormented by the waves. It was buffeted by the waves. The storm was so violent that the only thing the disciples could really do was to keep the boat upright. Peter, like the other disciples, would have wished that the sides of the boat were a little higher and the wood was a little bit thicker. And I suspect that by the middle of the night, by 3 a.m, when it was dark and when it was howling a gale, I would imagine that the disciples weren't worried about making it to the other side. The disciples just wanted to stay alive. And then all of a sudden, in the rain and through the wind and in the atrocious conditions, one of them notices a figure, a shadow, moving toward them on the water. And as that shadow gets closer, it becomes apparent it's the figure of a human being, Jesus himself walking to them on the water. What was Jesus up to? Walking around on the lake, on the sea at 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, just pause and think about that. What was he doing? Well, the clue is found in the Gospel of Mark, because Mark, in his account of this story, tells us that Jesus intended to pass them by. Why did Jesus want to pass them by? Was he not interested in them? Was he not concerned for their welfare? Did he want to impress them by saying, "Look at me walking on the water"? Well, that term pass by, used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, is a term that refers to a theophany. What do I mean? Well, what I mean by that is a defining moment when God makes a striking and temporary appearance in an earthly setting to an individual or to a group for the purpose of communicating a message. It was a theophany moment. So when Jesus came walking on the water, intending them to pass them by, he was revealing his presence and his power by the fact that he was physically walking on the waves of the sea. Jesus was coming to them. Jesus was having that moment, that encounter with them. And therefore, when Peter was summoned to step out of the boat, he had to depend in that theophany moment, in that moment of encounter, that moment of challenge, on Jesus. Jesus came at 3 o'clock in the morning when the disciples least expected it to happen, and in the middle of a storm. It's often in those theophany moments, those moments of encounter, at times that we least expect, not necessarily at 3 o'clock in the morning, but often in the storms of life, that Jesus shows up. And in those moments, we need to depend on Jesus as Jesus invites us to step out of whatever situation, whatever boat we ourselves may at that moment find ourselves in. 12 disciples in that theophany moment of Jesus walking on the water sat in the boat, probably all looking at each other thinking, what is happening here? And we don't know how 11 of them responded to that voice to depend on Jesus. Perhaps with confusion, perhaps with wonder, perhaps with disbelief. But what we do know is that one of them, Peter, was about to become a water walker. He recognized Jesus was present. He recognized the power of Jesus. He recognized that he needed, in that theophany moment, in that encounter with Jesus, in stepping out, to depend on him, even in the most unlikely place. Because he, albeit had been used to the sea, used to fishing and used to boats, he certainly had not been used to, for he had never done, walking on water. He realized, that is Peter, that this was an extraordinary opportunity for spiritual adventure and growth. So he thought, I'm going to step out of the boat and walk on water and depend on Jesus. That's the challenge to you and to I today. To put our dependency in those theophany moments in Jesus. To trust him when he invites us to step out of